He had never been trained to fire the weapon. He had never been allowed to fire the weapon. In 1941, the United States Navy did not permit black sailors to serve in combat roles. They could cook, they could clean, they could serve food to white officers, but they could not fight. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Doris Miller was collecting laundry aboard the USS West Virginia when Japanese torpedoes slammed into the ship's hull. Within minutes, he would be standing behind a Browning .50 caliber anti-aircraft gun, firing at enemy planes, shooting down at least 2 and possibly 3 Japanese aircraft. He was a mess attendant, a cook, a man the Navy considered unfit for combat because of the color of his skin, and he became one of the first American heroes of World War II. This is the story of Doris Miller, the sharecropper's son from Texas who wasn't supposed to be a warrior, the cook who manned a gun he had never been trained to use, the man who proved that courage has no color, and the Navy's shameful secret about why it took so long to tell his story. Doris Miller was born on October 12, 1919, in Waco, Texas. Yes, Doris. It was a common name for boys in rural Texas at the time, though he would go by Dory for most of his life. His parents, Connery and Henrietta Miller, were sharecroppers, working land they would never own, raising 4 sons in poverty that most Americans today cannot imagine. Life in Waco was hard for everyone during the Depression. It was harder for black families. The Millers worked from before dawn until after dark, picking cotton, tending crops, doing whatever work they could find. There was no money for luxuries. Sometimes there wasn't money for food. But Dory Miller had something that set him apart. He was big. By the time he reached high school, he stood 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighed over 200 pounds. He was a natural athlete, a fullback on the football team who could run through defenders like they weren't there. Coaches noticed him. Scouts talked about his potential. In another time, in another place, Dory Miller might have become a professional football player. But this was Texas in the 1930s. There were no opportunities for black athletes beyond high school. No college scholarships, no professional teams willing to sign them. When Dory graduated in 1937, he went back to working the fields with his father. He needed a way out, and in 1939 he found one. The United States Navy in 1939 was a segregated institution. Black men could enlist, but their options were severely limited. They could not become officers, they could not serve on submarines or in aviation, they could not work as gunners, engineers, or radio men. The Navy had exactly one rating open to black sailors: mess attendant. Mess attendants cooked food, they served food, they cleaned the officers' quarters and did their laundry. It was servant work, plain and simple. The Navy wanted black men as waiters and cooks, nothing more. Dory Miller joined anyway. On September 16, 1939, he walked into a recruiting station and signed up. The pay was steady, the food was guaranteed, and it was a way out of the cotton fields. If the Navy wanted him to be a cook, he would be a cook. After basic training, Miller was assigned to the USS Pyro, an ammunition ship. He quickly became the ship's heavyweight boxing champion, his size and strength making him nearly unbeatable. The white sailors who watched him fight saw something that the Navy's policies refused to acknowledge. This man was a warrior. In 1940, Miller was transferred to the USS West Virginia, one of the great battleships of the Pacific Fleet. The West Virginia was part of Battleship Row at Pearl Harbor, the heart of American naval power in the Pacific. Miller served in the ship's galley, preparing meals for over 1,500 men. He was promoted to Mess Attendant 3rd Class, then 2nd Class. He was good at his job, reliable, professional. He was also frustrated. Miller had not joined the Navy to cook. He had joined to serve his country, to be part of something larger than himself. But the Navy would not let him be anything more than a servant. He could see the guns on deck, the aircraft overhead, the machinery of war all around him, and he was not allowed to touch any of it. That was about to change. Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor was quiet. Most of the fleet was in port. Sailors were sleeping in, enjoying their day off. Church services were scheduled for later. Some men were planning to go ashore to see movies or visit Honolulu. Doris Miller was awake early. He was collecting laundry from the officers' quarters, one of his regular duties. The West Virginia was berthed alongside the USS Tennessee, both ships moored at Battleship Row. It was a beautiful Hawaiian morning, clear skies, calm water. At 7:55 a.m., the first Japanese aircraft appeared over Pearl Harbor. The attack came in two waves, 353 Japanese aircraft, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, fighters. They swept across the harbor like a swarm of angry hornets, dropping bombs and torpedoes on the sleeping fleet. The USS Arizona exploded when a bomb penetrated its forward magazine, killing over 1,100 men in an instant. The Oklahoma capsized within minutes, trapping hundreds of sailors inside its hull. The West Virginia was hit early and hit hard. Japanese torpedo planes came in low over the water, dropping their weapons directly into the ship's port side. The first torpedo struck below the waterline, then another and another. Within the first few minutes of the attack, the West Virginia had been hit by at least 7 torpedoes and 2 bombs. Miller felt the ship shudder with each impact. He dropped his laundry and ran, not away from the danger, toward it. He emerged onto the deck to find chaos, fire everywhere, smoke so thick he could barely see, men screaming, dying, trying to fight back against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. The ship's captain, Mervyn Benyon, had been hit by shrapnel from a bomb that struck the Tennessee alongside. He was lying on the bridge, his stomach torn open, bleeding out. An officer saw Miller and shouted at him to help move the captain to safety. Miller was strong, stronger than almost anyone on the ship. He carried Captain Benyon to a sheltered spot behind the conning tower, but there was nothing that could be done. The captain's wounds were fatal. He would die within the hour, still giving orders to his men, still trying to save his ship. With the captain down, Lieutenant Commander Dory Johnson took command. He saw Miller standing there, this huge young man who had just carried the dying captain across a burning deck, and he made a decision that would have been unthinkable just minutes before. Johnson pointed to a .50 caliber Browning anti-aircraft gun. The gun's regular crew was dead or wounded. No one was manning it. "Get on that gun," Johnson ordered. Miller had never fired this weapon. He had never been trained on any weapon. The Navy did not train mess attendants to fight. But Dory Miller climbed behind that gun, grabbed the handles, and figured it out. The Browning .50 caliber was a fearsome weapon. It fired 500 rounds per minute, each bullet big enough to punch through an aircraft engine. The recoil was brutal, the noise deafening. It was not a weapon for amateurs. Miller didn't care. He watched the other gunners to see how they aimed, how they led their targets, how they traversed the weapon to track the fast-moving planes. Then he started shooting. Japanese aircraft were everywhere. They came in low over the water, strafing the deck with machine gun fire. They dove from above, dropping bombs on the burning ships. Miller tracked them with his gun, swinging the heavy weapon through its arc, firing in long bursts at anything with a red circle on its wings.
He hit one plane, saw it stagger in the air, smoke pouring from its engine, before it spiraled down into the harbor. Then another. The second plane exploded in midair, debris raining down on the water. Witnesses would later say he hit a third, though the chaos of battle made it impossible to confirm every kill. Miller kept firing until the ammunition ran out. Then he helped carry wounded sailors to safety. The West Virginia was sinking, settling into the mud of Pearl Harbor, but Miller stayed at his post until ordered to abandon ship. By that time, the attack was ending. The Japanese aircraft were flying back to their carriers, leaving behind a harbor filled with burning ships and dead men. 2,403 Americans died that morning. The Pacific Fleet was crippled, and a mess attendant from Texas had just become one of the first heroes of World War II. The Navy wasn't sure what to do with him. In the days after Pearl Harbor, the Navy released accounts of heroism during the attack. Officers who had fought to save their ships, gunners who had shot down enemy aircraft, sailors who had rescued their shipmates from burning compartments. Doris Miller's name was not among them. When reporters asked about the mess attendant who had manned the gun, the Navy's response was evasive. They referred to him only as an unidentified Negro messman. No name, no details, just an acknowledgement that something had happened without explaining what or who. The Navy had a problem. Miller's heroism was undeniable. Multiple officers had witnessed him manning the gun, shooting down planes, carrying the wounded to safety. The Navy's segregation policies were built on the assumption that black men were not capable of the same service as whites. Miller had just proven that assumption wrong, and the Navy didn't know what to do about it. The black press was not willing to let Miller be forgotten. The Pittsburgh Courier, the most influential African-American newspaper in the country, launched a campaign to identify and honor the mysterious hero. Through interviews with survivors and their own investigation, they discovered Miller's name and his full story. The Courier began a public campaign demanding that Miller receive the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. They collected thousands of signatures on petitions. They published editorials. They pressured politicians to take action. If a white sailor had done what Miller did, they argued he would already be a national hero. Why should Miller be any different? The campaign put the Navy in an impossible position. They could not ignore Miller's heroism without looking racist, but they also did not want to give the Medal of Honor to a black man, which would set a precedent they were not comfortable with. The compromise they reached was telling.
On May 27, 1942, Admiral Chester Nimitz personally presented Doris Miller with the Navy Cross, the third highest decoration for valor in combat. The ceremony was held aboard the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise with full military honors. Nimitz pinned the medal on Miller's chest and shook his hand. Cameras flashed. The moment was recorded for posterity. Miller became famous. His face appeared on recruitment posters encouraging black Americans to enlist. Above and beyond the call of duty, the posters proclaimed. He toured the country, speaking at war bond rallies, shaking hands with dignitaries, becoming a symbol of black valor in a segregated military. But the Navy Cross was not the Medal of Honor, and despite the public recognition, Miller's rating did not change. He was still a mess attendant. He was still not allowed to serve in a combat role. The Navy was happy to use him as a symbol, but they were not willing to change the policies that had kept him behind a stove instead of behind a gun. Miller asked to be assigned to gunnery training. He wanted to fight. He had proven he could fight, but the Navy said no. There was no rating for black gunners. There were no combat positions available for men of his race. He was sent back to sea, still a cook, still serving meals to white officers. In the fall of 1943, Doris Miller was assigned to the USS Liscum Bay, an escort carrier operating in the Pacific. Escort carriers were small, lightly armored ships used to provide air cover for amphibious operations. They were effective, but they were also vulnerable. Sailors called them Kaiser coffins because of their thin hulls and tendency to burn when hit. On November 24, 1943, the Liscum Bay was supporting the invasion of Makin Atoll in the Gilbert Islands. At 5:10 in the morning, a Japanese submarine fired a single torpedo into the carrier's stern. The torpedo struck the bomb magazine. The explosion was catastrophic. The entire ship seemed to lift out of the water before breaking apart. The Liscum Bay sank in less than 23 minutes. Of the 918 men aboard, 644 were killed. Among them was Mess Attendant First Class Doris Miller. He was 24 years old. His body was never recovered. Doris Miller's story did not end with his death. In the years after the war, the campaign to award him the Medal of Honor continued. Civil rights groups argued that he had been denied the nation's highest honor because of his race, that white sailors had received the Medal of Honor for lesser acts of heroism. The Navy resisted, claiming that the evidence did not support an upgrade. The debate continues to this day. Multiple bills have been introduced in Congress to award Miller the Medal of Honor posthumously. None have passed. The Navy maintains that Miller's actions, while heroic, did not meet the specific criteria for the Medal of Honor. Critics argue that the criteria have been applied inconsistently and that Miller's race remains the unspoken factor. But Miller has received other honors. In 1973, the Navy commissioned the USS Miller, a destroyer escort named in his honor. It was the first Navy ship named after a black sailor. In 2020, the Navy announced that its newest aircraft carrier, CVN-81, would be named USS Doris Miller. When it is commissioned, the Doris Miller will be one of the most powerful warships ever built, a nuclear-powered supercarrier capable of projecting American power across the globe. The sharecropper's son from Waco, Texas, who wasn't allowed to fire a gun because of his skin color, will have a 100,000-ton warship bearing his name. Miller's legacy extends beyond ships and medals. His heroism at Pearl Harbor became a symbol of the contradiction at the heart of America's war effort. The country was fighting against Nazi racism abroad while maintaining its own racial hierarchy at home. Black Americans served in a segregated military, fighting for freedoms they themselves were denied. Miller's example helped change that. His story was used by civil rights advocates to push for integration of the armed forces, a goal finally achieved in 1948 when President Truman signed Executive Order 9981. Today, Black Americans serve at every level of the military, from enlisted ranks to four-star generals and admirals. They command ships, fly aircraft, and lead troops into battle. Doris Miller didn't live to see that change. He died in the Pacific, still classified as a cook, still denied the combat role he had proven he deserved. But his courage at Pearl Harbor helped make that change possible. He showed what Black Americans could do when given the chance. He proved that heroism has no color. On that Sunday morning in December 1941, when the bombs were falling and the ships were burning, Doris Miller did not ask permission to fight. He did not wait for orders that would never come. He saw a gun that needed manning, and he manned it. He saw planes that needed shooting, and he shot them. He saw wounded men who needed saving, and he saved them. The Navy didn't train him for combat. They didn't want him in combat. But when combat came, Doris Miller was ready. He was a cook who became a warrior, a servant who became a hero. A man who showed courage comes from the heart, not from the color of one's skin or the rank on one's sleeve. And 80 years later, his name will sail the oceans of the world on the deck of a supercarrier, a permanent reminder of what one man can do when he refuses to accept the limits others place on him.